Right now, while everyone is still arguing about Iceman streams, album sales, and who is the better rapper between Drake and whoever he is dissing this week, something far darker, far heavier, and far more career-ending has quietly slipped into the background, and almost nobody is connecting the two pieces of this puzzle yet. Because what is unfolding around Drake at this exact moment is not a rap beef, it is not a label squabble, it is not another internet argument over lyrics, it is a legal earthquake, it is a financial collapse waiting to detonate. It is, in plain English, the kind of nightmare that does not get washed away with a diss track, a ghostwriter, or a press release. And the most disturbing part of all of this is that it is happening in two places at the exact same time, on two completely different battlefields, and yet they are starting to look like they were always pieces of the same story. So if you were ready to see how Drake just walked straight into the worst legal storm of his entire career, how a $38 billion shadow is now hanging directly over his head, how Spotify, of all places, just pulled the rug out from under one of his loudest victory laps, and how every single one of these threads, the stake situation, the Iceman streaming numbers, the rumored tipping moves with Rick Ross, all of them may be quietly stitching themselves into one final fatal narrative, then you need to lock in right now. Because by the time we are done here, you are going to look at this entire Iceman era completely differently, and you are going to see why people are now whispering that the Iceman is the one being put on ice. Now, before we go any deeper into this, if you want to actually understand how a music superstar gets pulled into a federal-style class action, how a streaming retraction quietly rewrites history in real time, and why so many of us are starting to feel like this is not a coincidence at all, then do me a small favor first. Tap that like button, hit subscribe, comment one single word, anything, just so the algorithm knows people are paying attention to this side of the story, and not just the headlines that Drake's team wants you to see. Because what we are about to break down is the kind of thing that gets buried, gets reframed, gets spun, and gets quietly forgotten if nobody keeps talking about it out loud. So talk about it, share this, send it to the friend who still thinks Iceman is winning. Because once you see how these dominoes are lined up, you are not going to be able to unsee it. Let us start with the bigger of the two stories, because it is the one that has the longer fuse and the bigger explosion attached to the end of it. According to reporting that has been picked up by Forbes, that has been written about by the Harvard Journal of Sports and Entertainment Law, and that is now spilling into every mainstream outlet that touches the music and gambling beat, Drake is named inside a sweeping class action lawsuit tied directly to Stake.us. The number being thrown around in the surrounding coverage and in the broader exposure of this case is staggering, with figures in the range of $38.7 billion being mentioned in connection to the wider scope of the case. Let that sit in the air for a second. 38.7. That is not a misprint. That is not a typo. That is the kind of number that does not show up next to a rapper's name unless something has gone deeply, structurally, catastrophically wrong. And the framing of the case is not a slap on the wrist over an ad campaign. It is a RICO-style class action. RICO, the same legal framework that gets used to dismantle organized criminal enterprises, the same framework that lawyers reach for when they believe a pattern of conduct has crossed from marketing into something that they argue looks like coordinated wrongdoing. Now, to be very clear with you, because this is important, every single allegation inside this case is exactly that, an allegation. Nothing has been proven in court. Drake has not been convicted of anything. Stake has not been found guilty of anything. The plaintiffs are making claims, the lawyers are presenting a theory, and the public is doing what the public always does, which is forming an opinion long before a judge ever bangs a gavel. So as we walk through what is being argued, keep that disclaimer locked in your head. We are talking about claims, not confirmed facts. But the claims themselves are wild enough that they deserve the spotlight. Because what the plaintiffs are reportedly arguing is not that Drake simply appeared in a few promotional clips. The argument being floated is that the promotion of Stake.us by major celebrities played a role in pulling everyday people, regular working people, into a platform whose mechanics, they say, blurred the line between sweepstakes entertainment and something that functionally behaved like real money gambling for users who couldn't always tell the difference. And the heaviest piece of the speculation, the part that is lighting the internet on fire right now, is the chatter around the so-called tipping feature. The community theory, and again, this is speculation circulating online and not a confirmed legal finding, is that the tipping mechanic inside Stake's ecosystem could, in theory, be used to shuffle balances between accounts in a way that some observers are now openly wondering about when they look at who was promoting the platform and who was visibly tied to it. The names being whispered in that speculation, fairly or unfairly, include Drake and Rick Ross, two of the loudest faces ever connected to the Stake brand era. I want to repeat this because the line really matters. None of that tipping theory has been proven. It is community speculation. It is bar talk. It is internet forensics. But the reason it's going viral is because the optics are loud, the promotions were loud, and the lawsuit itself is even louder. When you stack a RICO-style filing on top of a celebrity endorsement era that already made millions of people uncomfortable, the speculation writes itself, even before a single piece of evidence is reviewed in open court. And here is where the story turns into something almost cinematic, because while one fire is burning in the courtroom, another fire just lit itself directly on the scoreboard. Spotify, the same platform that Drake's camp has used for years to plant flags, post screenshots, brag about records, and beat their chest in front of every competitor in the genre, has now reportedly walked back a streaming milestone tied to the Iceman rollout. Think about that for 1 second. The platform that built half of Drake's modern mythology is the same platform that just quietly clipped a piece of it off. The retraction itself is not just an embarrassing footnote, it is symbolic. It is the kind of correction that, in the streaming era, hits harder than a bad review, harder than a flopped single, harder than a missed Grammy. Because in 2026, numbers are the language of dominance, and when the scoreboard itself flickers and walks a record back, the entire victory speech that was built on top of that number suddenly looks fragile. For context, this matters because the Iceman rollout has not been a normal rollout. It has been one of the most aggressive, one of the most chest-pounding, one of the most chart-obsessed promotional cycles we have seen in years. Every milestone has been posted, screenshotted, framed, captioned, and shoved into the faces of every rival the camp could think of. So when one of those milestones quietly evaporates, when a record that was supposed to put Iceman in the same sentence as untouchable legacy artists gets pulled back, it does not just hurt a single statistic, it cracks the entire narrative spine of the campaign. And the timing is what makes it almost surreal, because at the exact same moment that this retraction is making rounds online, the legal nightmare on the Stake side is bubbling up in the press. Two stories, two outlets, two completely different industries, and yet they are landing in the same news cycle, hitting the same artist, eating the same headline real estate. Now, this is the moment where I have to slow down and ask you the uncomfortable question, because this is what serious commentary is supposed to do. Is this all just bad luck stacked on top of more bad luck, or is there a pattern that we have been politely refusing to name out loud for months? Because if you zoom out, if you really pull the camera back and look at the last 12 to 18 months of Drake's public life, you start to see something that nobody on his side wants you to focus on. You see a UMG lawsuit cycle that nobody asked for. You see streaming figures that have been challenged in public filings. You see 100 million streams that, by his own legal team's earlier complaints, were flagged as artificially inflated on a completely different track. You see an album rollout where the messaging shifted from music to grievance, from grievance to provocation, from provocation to legal threats. And now, on top of all of that, you see a class action of historic scale wrapping itself around an endorsement era that he was once proud to put his name on. That is not one bad week. That is not one bad headline. That is a trajectory. And the people who have been paying close attention to this artist for years, the same people who were called bitter, called hateful, called jealous for pointing out the contradictions, are sitting here right now feeling very, very vindicated. Because everything they tried to warn the casuals about, the over-reliance on stunts, the over-reliance on rollouts that depend on antagonism, the over-reliance on numbers that needed to be defended in court instead of celebrated in silence, it is all coming home in the same news cycle. And the Iceman, the character, the persona, the entire identity built around this album cycle is starting to look less like a victorious closing chapter and more like the moment a long con finally meets the daylight. Now, let us talk about the elephant in the room, because the community will not let this one go, and honestly, neither should we, as long as we keep the disclaimer attached. Inside the swirl of speculation around the Stake situation, the name that keeps surfacing right next to Drake's is Rick Ross, two of the most visible faces of the platform's promotional push, two artists with overlapping fan bases, overlapping business interests, and a long, well-documented professional friendship. And the theory that the online community has latched onto, again, theory, not fact, not legal finding, not court verdict, is that the tipping function inside Stake's ecosystem may have offered a mechanism that could, in theory, be used to move balances in ways that would not look like ordinary user behavior. The speculation, and I want to keep stressing this word, speculation, is that this is being looked at by observers as a potential angle of interest, given how visible both artists were inside that ecosystem. That is the speculation. That is what is being said online. That is not a legal claim that has been proven in any courtroom. And the reason I'm being so careful with that language is because this is exactly the kind of moment where rumor gets dressed up as fact, and the people repeating it the loudest are the ones who get sued next. So let's not be that person. Let's be the smart audience. Let's look at what is actually filed, what is actually alleged, what is actually being argued by attorneys with their names attached to court documents, and let's separate that from the noise that swirls around any celebrity case. But what we can say is this: the questions are loud, the community is asking them, and the silence from the camps involved, whenever the silence does or does not arrive, will be its own form of answer. Here's another angle that has been circulating online, and again, file this under speculation rather than confirmed reporting. There's a growing theory in the community that the Iceman rollout, in hindsight, felt rushed for a reason. The album dropped in a flurry. The promotional cycle was front-loaded with shock content. The disses, the captions, the cover art reveals, the social media bombs, all of it landed in a compressed window. Some observers are now connecting that compression to the legal pressure that was reportedly building in the background. The argument, again speculative, is that when an artist senses storm clouds on the horizon, they push the product out fast, they harvest the headlines fast, and they bank the goodwill fast before the storm hits the front page. Whether that's what actually happened with Iceman, none of us can say with certainty, but the timing, when you lay it out on a calendar, is striking enough that it has become a major talking point.
And this is where the storytelling gets almost cinematic, because the Iceman character itself, the persona built around coldness, control, untouchability, suddenly feels ironic in the context of a courtroom filing that argues the exact opposite. The image was cold, the image was untouchable, the image was bulletproof, but images do not file motions, images do not respond to subpoenas, images do not testify. And when the music ends and the courtroom doors open, the persona stops being protection and starts being evidence in the court of public opinion. The Iceman, the very symbol Drake chose to wrap this album in, may end up being remembered not as a triumph, but as the exact moment the chill finally cracked. There is one more piece to this that I cannot let pass without naming, and that is the way the media coverage itself has shifted in the last few weeks. For years, the same outlets, the same blogs, the same podcasts, the same chart watchers treated every Drake headline as a celebration by default. Wins were amplified, losses were softened, numbers were quoted without context, awkward moments were buried under 3 new headlines by the end of the day. That was the rhythm. That was the protective shell. And that shell is now visibly cracking. Forbes is covering the lawsuit angle. The Harvard Journal of Sports and Entertainment Law has published analysis on it. Mainstream outlets that used to keep their distance from rap industry mess are now wading directly into it because the dollar figure attached and the legal framework involved have pulled this story out of the music section and into the business section. And when a story migrates from the music page to the business page, the rules of coverage change. The protective instincts disappear, the fluff drops away, and the artist is no longer treated as a celebrity but as a defendant or a party of interest, depending on which document you are reading. That shift is the part that should worry the camp more than anything, because a rap beef can be won with a song, A streaming dip can be patched with a feature. A bad review can be drowned in a viral moment. But a legal story that has already made the leap into business and law publications does not get reversed by a clever bar on track 17. It gets reversed by lawyers, by filings, by motions, by years of process, and by an outcome that nobody in the public will get to control. That is the world Drake is now operating inside. And that is the world Iceman, no matter how many songs are added to it in a deluxe edition, was never built to fight. This is the part where I want to be honest with you about how this is going to be told from this point forward. The internet has already chosen its frame, and once the internet chooses a frame, that frame becomes gravity. The frame right now is collapsing empire. 2 existential lawsuits in 1 news cycle, a retracted streaming record, a rollout that in retrospect looks defensive instead of dominant, a loyal supporter base that is now nervously refreshing for the next headline, a rival who shall remain quietly named in the background, sitting on a body of work that is aging into legend, while the noise around the antagonist gets louder and uglier by the week. That is what a collapse looks like in the streaming era. Not a single dramatic moment, but a series of cuts, each one small enough to dismiss in isolation, and all of them devastating when you finally line them up next to each other. And here is the brutal truth that I think a lot of fans are still not ready to face. The story stopped being about the music a long time ago. It became about the brand. It became about the metrics. It became about defending the perception. And when the brand becomes the thing you are defending, the moment the brand cracks, there is nothing underneath to catch the fall, because the music was supposed to be the foundation, and instead, it became the marketing material. That is the silent tragedy underneath this entire Iceman era. It was never really an album. It was a flag planted on top of a battlefield that turned out to be made of paper. So what happens next? Realistically, without the hysteria, without the dunking, without the schadenfreude that this kind of story always invites. A few things in my honest read of the situation. First, the legal process will move slowly, because legal processes always move slowly, and the public will lose interest in the day-to-day filings long before the case is anywhere near a resolution. That's normal. That's how these things always go. Second, the streaming retraction will keep getting referenced, not because the specific number matters, but because it becomes a symbol, and symbols outlive statistics. Every future numbers brag will now carry the asterisk of that one retraction in the back of the audience's mind. Third, the rumor mill around the tipping speculation will continue, fairly or unfairly, until something concrete either confirms it or kills it. And as long as it is unresolved, it will hang over every interview, every red carpet, every late-night appearance. And fourth, the camp will respond, eventually, the way camps always respond, with a mix of denial, deflection, and a new project designed to flood the conversation with something else. That's the playbook. That's what we will see.
But here's the catch. The playbook only works when the public is willing to be distracted. And after a year of rollouts that have leaned harder and harder on antagonism, harder and harder on grievance, harder and harder on attacking other artists to generate engagement, the public is starting to look tired. Tired of the antics, tired of the screenshots, tired of being told that mediocrity is dominance. And when the audience gets tired, the playbook stops working. That is the variable nobody on that side seems to have priced in yet. So where does that leave us? It leaves us watching one of the most fascinating, most uncomfortable, most slow-motion turning points in modern music history. It leaves us watching a superstar who, by every available metric, is no longer playing the same game he was playing 2 years ago. It leaves us watching a rollout that was supposed to be a coronation become a courtroom prelude. It leaves us watching a number, a retraction, a lawsuit, and a rumor stitch themselves into a story that none of us were supposed to be allowed to tell out loud. And it leaves us with one final, very simple question. When the music stops, when the captions go quiet, when the lawyers take over, and when the next headline lands, who is going to be left standing inside the Iceman costume? Because right now, from where the rest of us are sitting, the suit is starting to look very, very empty. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your honest take in the comments. Do you think the stake situation is the bigger threat to Drake's long-term career? Or is the Spotify retraction the moment that quietly broke the Iceman mythology in half? Do you believe the tipping speculation is going to develop into something real, or do you think it will fade into the noise like so many internet theories have before? Do you think we see Rick Ross's name pulled deeper into this conversation in the months ahead, or do you think the public lets that part of the story dissolve? And the biggest question of all, when the dust eventually settles on this entire cycle, do you think Iceman gets remembered as the comeback chapter the camp wanted it to be, or does it get remembered as the exact moment the Empire showed everyone the cracks it had been hiding for years? Tap the like, hit subscribe, share this with a friend who still thinks the headlines are just a phase, and stay close, because the next part of this story is already moving, and once the next filing drops, once the next retraction lands, once the next domino falls, you are going to want to be in the room when we break it down piece by piece. This is the kind of story that does not end with a song, it ends with a verdict. And until that verdict arrives, we keep watching, we keep documenting, and we keep telling it the way it actually is, not the way the press release wants us to tell it. Lock in, stay tuned, the Iceman story is far from over.